had the school board members conspiring against the parents who were raising questions about why are you pushing this equity agenda.
That's when I was like, oh, they're in trouble.
They said 2020 was the back to normal election, but it didn't feel like we got back to normal. Things got more insane because we thought it was over, but it really wasn't over.
When they interviewed Gen Z for their reason for voting for Trump, what are their top answers?
The biggest swing was among Gen Z. The biggest swing was among millennials.
Not to mention a president who was clearly in decline while everyone was telling us that he was fine. It didn't feel like anyone was actually in control.
She had to take 2 days off the campaign trail to prepare for a friendly interview by the mainstream media. So what's she gonna do in a studio with 3 hours with Joe Rogan?
With Harris, you really had no idea who she actually was. All right, I'm with Patrick Ruffini, everybody. Welcome to Walk-Ins Welcome. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me.
I really wanted to talk to you about, well, the book you wrote that was quite premonitive of what happened in this election, the shifts you saw kind of predicted, why you wrote your book, which is Party of the People inside the Multiracial Populist Coalition Remaking the GOP. And that came out in 2023, correct?
That's right.
Okay. So you were very far ahead of the curve on this. And then I also want to just talk to you about what, trends you kind of predict or what you see moving forward and all of I am assuming you're just like poring over all the data coming out now as everything wraps up.
Yeah, that's fair to say.
So tell me why you wrote your book, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, so in the post 2016 moment, it felt like there was a narrative growing about the Republican Party that I felt was the wrong narrative, which was that it was a party that was increasingly doubling down on this white working class voter that was a voter that was only, as Democrats throughout the Obama era tried to remind us again and again, was an electorate in decline. That, maybe Trump winning in 2016, he won, but it was a fluke. That it was Democrats who represented this rising majority, this so-called rising American electorate that would govern America from here on forward. And obviously 2016 broke that, but the narrative coming out of 2016 was that Trump won based on appealing to racism, xenophobia, all the different phobias, and that was primarily why he won. But in looking at some of the polling heading into the 2020 election, I was noticing something very interesting, that after that moment, we had the George Floyd protests and everything that happened there. Trump's was actually doing better among African American voters after all of that. The place where he wasn't doing as well was with white voters, and he was doing better with Latino voters. And obviously, as the focus of 2020 shifted more towards crime, more towards pandemic lockdowns, and specifically working class voters who couldn't go back to work, it seemed like there was a disconnect between this narrative and what we were actually seeing in the election. Now, I thought maybe, the polls had Trump way behind in the 2020 election, and I thought, well, maybe this is interesting if Trump does well or comes pretty close in 2020. Maybe there's something here, but I don't think there's really a book here if Trump gets stomped in the 2020 election. Well, he doesn't get stomped. He comes very, very close to being reelected, despite everything, despite the global pandemic. He comes within 0.7 percentage points of winning Wisconsin, which would have been that pivotal 270th electoral vote in 2020. And he does it basically based on the trends I was seeing over the summer, which was Latino voters shifting his way, doing better among African American voters, doing better among working class voters of all races. And so if Trump in 2020 could do better among these voters, kind of imagine if we had something like 2024 happen, right, where the Democrats were in office, voters were very unhappy with the Democrats, and particularly the voters who were most unhappy with the Democrats were younger voters, minority voters, voters who were hit hardest by all of this inflation that we've seen, have been hit hardest by the increases in crime that we've seen in major cities, and have been hit hardest, frankly, by the surge of illegal immigrants, especially in communities on the border, where in 2020 we saw some counties shift up to 55 points towards Trump. And that continued in 2024, where most of the counties in the border seeing this surge of illegal immigration are now red.
Yeah. I think something too that's kind of underreported that I've thought a lot about, well, they're talking about it now, is the Gen Z men voting in kind of mass for Trump. And I have a lot of family members who have kids that are that age, and they couldn't vote in 2020, but they absolutely suffered in their schools and colleges under these COVID lockdowns, mandates to get more and more vaccines that they weren't really on board with. And then a lot of them, went to college and were kind of age to vote in this election for the first time. And I think a lot of the COVID stuff that we didn't see in 2022 in the midterms, where I really thought the electorate would punish some of, I was like, I really thought there would be more punishment for a lot of the COVID stuff in 2022, this red wave that kind of never came. And now we see it. I do think it was a lot of this younger generation too, voting for really the first time in some instances, in a backlash to that COVID stuff that they experienced in high school and college.
Yeah, you're right. Almost nobody said COVID was the main issue that they were voting on.
Mhm.
But I think you can very much see this as a delayed reaction COVID election. And it was delayed
Interesting.
reaction to the inflation that we saw come out of the pandemic. It was a delayed reaction to, I think, the controversy that you saw in schools with parents feeling like they were not being given control over their over their kids' educations, and in reaction to the lockdowns. In the two states where we really saw this big in 2022 were Florida and New York. In
Mhm.
Florida, you see Republicans and Ron DeSantis running the table, as a strong governor who resisted the COVID lockdowns, the COVID bureaucracy, and won big, on the basis of really standing up both to the woke trend and also to the COVID overlords in DC. And in New York, we saw a huge swing to the right there in the governor's race. That was obviously ground zero for all of this stuff, for everything that happened. But we didn't really, you're right, we didn't really see it very many other places. We did see it in Virginia, though, in 2021,
Mhm.
where the Republican governor there, won a blue state against these school closure policies, which, I live in Virginia. They were the worst practically of anywhere. We thought this was over. Practically the start of the 2020 and 2021 school year, we thought, okay, now our kids can go back. And it was just every 2 weeks they were jerking us around and
Mm.
going for 2 weeks, and then they're out for practically a whole other school year. I mean, it was ridiculous living through that. And there was a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, particularly in a place like Loudoun County.
Yes.
And the Loudoun County School Board up there. And the reason I'll mention this for a reason. You had the school board members conspiring against the parents, who were raising questions about, why are you pushing this equity agenda? Why are our kids, while schools are not being locked down, while our kids can't even go to school? Why are you having all these materials like privilege bingo and teaching materials? And that was ground zero for that backlash. In this election, Loudoun County swung 9 points
Wow.
towards Donald Trump. Right. I mean, a huge swing in Loudoun County, huge swing in the Virginia suburbs. That was kind of a delayed reaction, right? To
Yep.
and I think it was just Americans. We really did want this. Was they said 2020 was the back to normal election, but it didn't feel like we got back to normal
Right.
after that. Things got more insane because we thought it was over, but it really wasn't over. And that was the frustration that a lot of people felt. And so I think this in many ways really was the back to normal election.
When they interview Gen Z, what for their reason for voting for Trump, what are their top answers?
I think that there was a huge amount of frustration with Gen Z, and in terms of just feeling really left behind.
Mhm.
Obviously they've been hit hardest by COVID. They couldn't really find maybe the job they wanted, or maybe they had started working and were kind of stuck in jobs, or we're in these now all remote jobs, which a lot of
Right.
people are like, yeah, yay, fun. I get to not actually go into the office. But at the same time, like, you're really depriving yourselves of opportunities to learn from more senior people and build your careers and network, right? So it really felt like they've lost a lot. There was a lot of those dynamics happening with young voters, but I think it was just the frustration, right, of being, that they really got the short end of the stick in all of this,
Yeah.
and particularly being hit hardest by inflation when you don't have a lot of money to begin with. I mean,
Yeah.
I think and you really saw that frankly bear out in a lot of the results, where the biggest swing was among Gen Z, the biggest swing was among millennials. You had, in particular, younger men move, but you also had young women move, which
Yeah.
I think is really fascinating given the Harris campaign's obsession with the issue of abortion in this race that was supposed to hit young women, single women. I mean, those were the demographics. If you thought we're going to move to Harris on basis of that issue, it didn't move. In fact, they moved towards Trump.
Do you have any theories about why that would be? Aside from the inflation and them being hit hardest, do you have any
Well,
theories about why that didn't particularly speak to them in the way it may have spoken to, like, my generation, which is Gen X?
yeah,
Which
I just think
not in
like,
this election, I just mean in the past.
oh, in the past, I mean, look, sure. I just think like the overarching issue of the campaign was the economy, was inflation, and we were even seeing it in focus groups of suburban women,
Mm,
where they were the most angry and most upset about what was happening, not just obviously in the economy, but what was happening in the schools. I mean,
yep,
they were on the front row,
yep,
all of this insanity over the
yep.
last 4 years. And so I just don't think they were buying it. And so I think you had maybe a small sliver of people who felt like they had the luxury of voting on these other issues, who had the luxury of voting on some of these social issues or the issue of democracy. But everyone else, which is like a vast majority of people, did not have that luxury.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I did a whole one of my shows, Dumpster Fire, about how one of the things that I voted for the first time for Trump. I was 2016 Hillary, 2020 nobody, 2024 Trump. And I always joke like I'm an example of why the 19th Amendment should be repealed. All jokes aside, I am kind of what your book talks about, and I'm working class. I'm not college educated. So I didn't have that, but I'm also now a suburban mom. And one of the most infuriating things has been the gaslighting from people who are generally single in cities telling me what is or is not being taught in the schools when I'm on the playgrounds talk and birthday parties talking to moms. It's like the number one thing we talk about is where can we send our kid where they're not getting that weird stuff and what they're dealing with and the weird stuff that their kids are coming home with and the price of groceries. I'm like, we do the shopping. Like, we know the groceries are going up. You can't tell us they're not.
I think that's exactly it, and I could feel it myself. There were way more Trump signs this time than there were last time, and not, I'm a pollster, so I'm not supposed to. I don't really, I'm not really supposed to believe in that sort of thing. But I think it did speak to a certain level of energy and momentum on the ground that people really kind of felt like, this is not. It's okay to openly support Trump. Maybe you voted for Trump in secret last time, but it's okay to openly support Trump this time. So I think there was that. And I think that there was this sense of, okay, you all, the Democrats, promised me normalcy, promised me a return to, things were crazy over the 4 years of Trump's term. The White House was in chaos, all of that, and you all promised me that the adults would be put back in charge, and it just didn't feel that way for a lot of people. And I think the suburbs were ground zero for a lot of that stuff for sure.
Well, and you were kind of sold this bill of goods that things were gonna go back to normal. You immediately had the Afghanistan withdrawal that was a debacle. Then you had, Ukraine. Then you had October 7th in the mix, not to mention a president who was clearly in decline while everyone was telling us that he was fine. It didn't feel like anyone was actually in control. So, it, just even having Biden, who was in this kind of obvious decline while we're all told, he's like doing backflips behind closed doors or whatever, even that led to this feeling of like deep uncertainty as all of these wars are breaking out across America. So, not only was it supposed to be normal, it felt like no one was really behind the wheel in an increasingly escalating global situation.
No, that's totally right. And the two things in our polling that people said they wanted the most out of the next president were strong and decisive leadership and somebody who can bring about change. And needless to say, Trump led on both those characteristics. So, it becomes easy. And the reason why we pollsters ask that question is even when, right, you may have a poll come back and say, oh, Harris is up by 1 point or Harris is up by 2 points. We always look at those sorts of questions because that's really going to be what the undecided voters are really going to be disproportionately focused on. So if
Mm.
you have a whole group of voters who is maybe not as high information, is still waiting to make a decision, and you really want to know kind of what's in the zeitgeist, what's in the bloodstream about these candidates. And it really was that question of, we just need someone stronger in the White House. Obviously, a lot of that was mostly a contrast to Biden. And we need somebody who is going to bring about change. Obviously, Kamala Harris was not going to bring about change. She was part of that administration. So I think those
Mm.
two factors together, I mean, it was like I think it was like 70% of people chose one of those two things as their main priorities and what they were voting on in this election.
It's interesting because as somebody who kind of represents that demographic, I had a conversation with Mary Catherine Ham, a couple weeks before the election, and we were talking about, will the suburban mom break for Trump? And we were saying, it's only anecdotal. Obviously, we don't like to go by this either because I've been very wrong about things in the past for that reason. But all of our group chats were like, "So we're gonna vote for Trump? Like, we're all
Yep.
gonna do this?" And it did seem to be the case that in that instance, although it was anecdotal, it also kind of turned out to be true. I wasn't sure. I thought maybe I was just in a group of people who were more libertarian center right, and maybe there were lots of very excited group chats of suburban women who were very pro Harris, but it doesn't seem that way.
Yeah, but what I would say is, just compare if you're ever in that situation again. Just compare it to the last time, right? Were people as excited the last time to vote for Trump? And this is what I find in studying kind of
Mm.
public opinion data. It's that it really is all groups that kind of feel like the energy, if the vibes are off, you can kind of feel it with with all groups, not just your kind. It's either, if you're a Democrat, you're less excited. If you're a Trump supporter, or if you're in a Republican group, you're more excited. So I think that it just does a lot to, it just does a lot if you just compare the situation now to what felt like 4 years ago and 8 years ago.
Oh,
And
that's really
obviously, it's
interesting.
not scientific, but I think there's a lot of validity to that. The other sign that we were seeing in our polling was this idea of when we're asking people, how are your neighbors voting? You know,
Mm.
and how do you think your neighbors are going to vote? Trump had an 11-point advantage on people thinking more of their neighbors were voting for Trump, even if they themselves were not. That was something that maybe was telling us that maybe the polls aren't quite capturing the the person who's answering the polls, maybe a little bit more democratic than the person who that maybe doesn't answer surveys. But also, I just didn't see very much evidence of that Harris was flipping many voters.
Mhm.
It wasn't like there was this huge Liz Cheney notwithstanding, there was this huge constituency of Republicans or Trump 2020 voters who were now flipping over to Harris. It seemed like very much okay. She's maybe getting some of the people or most of the people who already flipped to Biden or already flipped to Hillary, but frankly, some of those people are coming back. And I think the
Mm.
story, right, in 2020, I mean, I think the reason that turned out the way it did was because I think there were a lot of people who were going to vote Republican in 2016, but couldn't do it, but couldn't go all the way over to Hillary and voted third party.
Okay.
And I think over time, Biden was maybe a little bit more of an acceptable option in 2020 to those folks. And those 2016 third party voters overwhelmingly voted for Biden in 2020, meaning the Democrats do a little bit better in 2020 and win. But this year it was a completely different story. And I just couldn't find, I could tell a very clear story about why 2020 turned out the way it did, but I couldn't really find the story about why would Harris hold on to enough of those Biden voters to actually be able to win the election.
Are you dealing with an HMO like I am? It's such a pain in the butt. If I want to get any sort of testing done to ensure I'm making my health a priority, I have to wait weeks for an appointment to see my doctor, then get a referral from her, and wait weeks more for an appointment with the specialist I needed to see just to get some lab work. Quest simplifies this process. I can purchase my own lab tests online and test for a multitude of health issues I might be concerned about, then take those results to my doctor better armed with the information I need. At questhealth.com, you can get hundreds of tests across several different categories, from allergies to heart health, hormones, sexual health, women's health tests for egg quantity, perimenopause, menopause, men's health tests for testosterone, prostate, and so much more. These are lab quality tests, the same ones you'd be given at your doctor's office, so prioritize your health and visit questhealth.com today. Use the code WALK-INS to get 25% off and find answers to the multitude of health questions you may have. That's questhealth.com and use the code WALK-INS for 25% off. Yeah, I don't think people knew her. One of the things when they were doing these podcasts and people were like, "This seems stupid," I was like, "Why? This seems brilliant to me because this is I'm an independent voter, and most of the people in the space that I know, or most of the people who subscribe to my site, they're not listening to MSNBC or CNN. All the independents I know pretty much listen to podcasts. They're almost exclusively. So if you wanted to reach an independent voter who may not have made up their mind, and I'm not sure how many people were truly trying to decide between Harris and Trump. I maybe know one or two people. It seemed like it was Trump or no one for many of these independents, or third party or Trump. And it was I don't think those people are you're not gonna get them by going on Brené Brown. So I don't that seemed like a very good strategy for JD Vance and Trump to go reach out to these people because it at the very least, the people had a better sense of who they were, whereas with Harris, you really had no idea who she actually was.
I think that's right, and I think that people have asked, should Harris have gone on Joe Rogan? And my answer, and you know this, you're already shaking your head. Absolutely not. It would have been
No.
just a complete disaster because she does not
Disaster.
know how to speak extemporaneously and like a real person. She had to take 2 days off the campaign trail to prepare for a friendly interview by the mainstream media. So, what's she going to do in a studio with 3 hours with Joe Rogan, right? And when they were trying to cut it to 45 minutes, right? And, oh, have him come to her, right? I mean, that's not how this works. And obviously, Trump, sat down with Joe Rogan. He sat down with a bunch of people,
Yep.
and was just real and authentic. And I think that counts for a lot. And it shows at least that his strategy paid off, whereas her strategy did not pay off. And what was her strategy? I mean, I think in many cases it wasn't. It was trying to stay low, lie low as much as possible, and avoid this type of scrutiny. But to the extent that she was aiming at these younger women, again, by having Beyonce and all these superstars at her rallies, it didn't pay off in terms of any movement on younger voters who moved all the way right.
It's interesting too because when that was breaking or it was leaked that she was thinking about doing that, I was like, "They must be losing." There's no way she would even consider. So that's when I was like, "Oh, they're in trouble." Whatever their internal polling is showing them, there's no way she would even consider this if she was 5 points up. There's just you wouldn't even consider going on something like Joe Rogan. First of all, this is a guy that they've been maligning on the left for years, and now suddenly he's the show you need to go on, but I mean, I was talking to Brendan O'Neill about this yesterday. We've both been on the show, and I'm like, "It's not easy." Like, you're 3 hours deep, and you're feeling tired, and you've gone down 20 rabbit holes, and you have no idea what you've talked about, and Joe's asking you very innocent questions, and sometimes you can get tripped up, especially if you're not somebody who I feel like she's been in politics for so long, she's, like, centerless. It's just like, "How do I stay in power? What do I need to say in the immediate moment?" But you just lose track of all the things you said, and it's why she gets so tripped up when she's trying to speak. That's just
Oh
my
yeah,
feeling that's my
oh yeah.
feeling
And
about her.
I thought, frankly, even the more friendly interviews, like The View, all of that, those were ones where she did the worst in, and I did not have an answer, obviously, to that question of how would you be different than Joe Biden, which was the number one thing they should have prepared her for. So
That's
what I just want to tell Democrats and what I want to tell the Harris campaign staff is I love all the dishing you're now doing about the spending on the campaign, about how you could blow through $1.5 billion in 15 weeks, and all these grifters who are telling you that, oh, we're losing black voters, we're losing Hispanic voters, cut me a check for this, that, and they did it. So I love all that dishing. The dishing I really want to hear is the media prep, the media trainers, the interview prep, because that was just a huge, huge blunder on their part.
That's so true. We covered this on Dumpster Fire yesterday, the dishing on the 1.5 billion. I'm like, this is the person who's supposed to fix our, help our economy. And they blew through $1.5 billion in 15 days, which is an astronomical number for me to even get my mind around as just a normie. And it is I was wondering the same thing. I kept saying throughout her whole campaign, how do you not just have answers to these questions are going to come your way that seem quite obvious? I don't know. At times I was like, do they want to lose? It felt like they just wanted to lose. I'm still not 100% sure that they didn't, but there was so much money involved. Surely that can't be the case.
I mean, I think you can tell. I mean, I think there's always a feeling, and again, first I'm on yard signs, first, and then I'm kind of like on the vibes, and then we're on the group chats, and all figuring out like, oh well, this kind of feels like Trump is going to win, but it's like even if the polls aren't telling you that, it just kind of feels that way. But
Totally.
it can get you never, especially in my line of work, you never want to get, cocky, or you always want to be running like you're 5 points behind. But I think you're right. And I think part of this was that she just wasn't a good candidate. If you just look at just from a traditional objective metrics, that it just seemed a little bit too forced in terms of people trying to convince themselves that maybe she was this, oh, she's actually the perfect candidate to
Right.
replace Joe Biden, right? Because they really had no other option. So they kind of had to maintain that illusion
Right.
for a while.
Oh, it's really been how do you feel about kind of all the this working class shift to I'm so fascinated with this because it was in 2016 when I went home, talked to my working class relative, and they were like, I'm just so effing sick of late night talking down to me and all of these people talking down to me. And I was like, huh. And he was saying like he and all of his buddies at work were voting for Trump. And I was like surprised because it's a blue state. And um it was it was Rhode Island actually, which has gone even more red, I think, in this election, and I was in LA at the time, and I went home and I was like, "I think we're missing something. I really think Trump could win this," and as I've told the story before, people unfriended me for even suggesting that, and then I was like, "Oh, we're really missing something. If that's the level
Sure.
of bubble that we're in, then I'm gonna be kicked out of friendships for even suggesting that he might win. We definitely must be missing something," and that was really when I first started I was interested in this and what your book is basically about because these are labor guys they traditionally would go blue, if I'm not mistaken, and it seemed like they were breaking for the right.
Yeah, and we saw that a lot in this election where the Teamsters didn't endorse, the firefighters didn't endorse, and these would like normally these would be kind of some of the first endorsements a Democrat would get. And you even had Biden bail out the Teamsters union pension fund, and they didn't endorse Harris after that. I mean, mind-boggling what was happening, and it was frankly pretty clear from their internal polling that they had polled their membership, and their members were very strongly for Trump and they couldn't make an endorsement, but I do think that that's right. Back when my book was first released, it was right around the UAW strike, and everybody was patting themselves on the back on the Democratic side for, oh, isn't it great that Biden went to the picket line? Well, who are the people on the picket line voting for? I mean, it was my question. I mean, because they're not following what the union bosses are telling them to do.
Right. Why do you think why do you think this shift occurred? What's your general feeling about it? You call it like the populist realignment.
Well, I think that the last few years have clarified the stakes for a lot of people. So I think that if you look at 2012, if you look at 2008, if you look at some of these elections before, you had, I think, traditional parties that really seemed like the same to a lot of people, and particularly to working class people. That I don't think that somebody I like Mitt Romney, I like John McCain, but I don't think they felt different enough for these working class hard hat guys to say make the jump, right? And certainly these were voters who have a lot of conservative beliefs on maybe on social issues, maybe on guns, but always voted Democratic because of the let's say propaganda that came out that was like we need to vote Democratic because they are the party of the working man and the
Mhm.
union guy, and that's what we do, right? And I think those that generation of Republicans never really saw fit to offer those voters a real alternative. You, in fact, had things like in 2012, Mitt Romney saying things like 47% of the public does not pay taxes, and they're just kind of leeching off the 53%. Right. Regardless of the accuracy of like who pays income taxes and who doesn't pay income taxes, that felt like a version of what you just talked about. Republicans looking down on working class voters, Republicans not seeming to care. And in response to that, right, the immediate reaction of the Republican establishment in those years was to, oh, we need to, yeah, we get it. We need to kind of moderate. We just need to be a little bit softer, kinder, gentler. And we need to go with a comprehensive immigration reform bill. We need to not seem so mean. and we just need to listen better, right? And Trump goes up and blows up all of that, and it turns out that he was right, right? I mean, he was right about what it would take to dislodge those people. So I don't think that these people weren't there already. Hey, a lot of them were there for Reagan. A lot of them were there for George W. Bush, right? It's not that this wasn't there before. It's just that I don't think the Republican Party before really gave these people a reason to go all in. And I think Trump did.
Yeah. What do you think they have to do to kind of maintain the working class vote, or these voters that kind of came over, even like, even somebody like me, an independent suburban mom who was kind of like, I don't know if I can do it, and at the end did. How do you what actually, like you said, what people who believe that someone can make change, or how do you maintain that? How do you keep that voter?
I think what Trump needs to do, right now, he needs to deliver stability, prosperity. He needs to basically get people feeling like it's 2019 in America again. And I know that sounds pretty simple, but people have been hugely kind of disjointed. I think feeling disjointed, discombobulated since the pandemic, even if it's not something they're consciously admitting to. That's really the vibe that we've seen in polling, what we've seen in the electorate, that things really feeling like they're on the wrong track. So I think what people are craving now is stability, is normalcy, is leaders who don't, are just normal and don't do crazy stuff. And I think, right, that Trump maybe fell a little bit, short of this in his time in office. And I think, though, he has an opportunity to correct that. He has an opportunity, I think, with a strong team behind him, with JD Vance as VP. I think he has that ability, right, to bring back those good economic vibes that you had during the first Trump term, but also just make sure the ship is running. I mean, he's running a tighter ship this
Yeah.
time. And I don't think it's necessarily kind of the Republican Party needs to shift to the left on, say, worker issues or this or that. Because I don't think that's what people are responding to. I think they're responding to, specifically in Trump, somebody who they thought brought strong leadership from an economics perspective, brought stability that we certainly haven't had the last 4 years. And I think that that's really the number one thing he can do is, a year, 6 months from now, a year from now, are we feeling better about the economy and the state of the economy and the state of the country than we did today and than we felt for the last 4 years?
What do you make of all the people who say that Americans may feel bad about the economy, but the economy, I mean, the investor class, the stock market, that all of the metrics actually show that that's not true?
Well, I know that was the Democrats' argument, and that's a bad argument to be telling people that they're wrong, or and it came off as gaslighting, frankly. Even
Mhm.
though, yeah, I mean, but frankly, guess what? Trump, could, I think, if the performance of the stock market since the election is any doubt, that it would go even higher. It could have might even have been gone even higher. So yeah,
Yeah.
that disconnect exists because there are metrics that show, but it just feels, to me, that things feel the real, I think, problem was the lack of stability people felt and the lack of predictability, right? So even if they had a job, is that job going to be enough to cover the grocery bill? Is that
Right.
job, and particularly like if my raise hasn't come in yet and everything's going up by 10% a year and some things are going up by 20, 30%. And by the way, if I want to buy a house, guess I can't do that,
Yeah.
right? So this lack of things you were able to count on are not things you're able to count on anymore. And so I think, to some extent, like all of these people are trotting out statistics I mean, just look at what the voters are telling you. I mean,
Mhm.
if good, I think you would have at least a little bit of a better perception among the voters. But it's just because some of your statistics don't cover really important things like home ownership, like
Right.
the ability to buy and sell a home that is not included in the official inflation statistics. Your mortgage payment is not included in the official inflation statistics, which
That's
is even
crazy.
worse. The interest rates, all of it. So and then you go to CVS and everything's locked up. I mean, the sense of things being just off, and
Yeah.
you're feeling like very unsettled about everything.
And it's funny to me that after because Trump was a chaotic time in American life, it's funny to me that he's, you know, the more stable option than the Biden-Harris, it's just I don't know, there's just something very funny to me that the America is like, "No, we'll go with that guy," who it was a bit chaotic, although I think a lot of Americans, probably myself to a certain extent, realized was that it was a lot of emotional chaos from people around you and from the media telling you all of this stuff about, um, Trump literally being Hitler for 4 years, and there was a lot of mental instability that really revealed itself. Meanwhile, everyone's life didn't really change that much and or got better. So it maybe felt like things were chaotic, but it was and I think he was obviously chaotic, but it I don't know that looking back materially, people could have been like I used to ask people during that time, how has your actual individual life, other than people around you having mental breakdowns, gotten worse? And they didn't usually have an answer. So, maybe people were able to reflect on that this time
Yeah,
around. How much do you
yeah.
how much do you think, like, social permission factored in? This is something I've been really contemplating the past few days. This is almost like the prophecy of Breitbart coming true, the politics kind of happening downstream of culture. How much of Elon Musk getting on board for Trump and really having these people who are kind of even larger personalities in some ways than Trump, making him like I've been talking so much about this, just how never in my life can I remember a time when the Republicans were quote unquote cool. You saw this UFC moment and all the young kids are doing the
Yeah.
dances and the athletes are doing the dances. Like never in my you're much smarter than me and know a lot more about history. Maybe there was a time that this was true, but when has this ever been the case? It's wild to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I mean, this is it is completely flipped. And, just go back to 15 years ago. You had Obama. You had young people voting 2-1 for Obama. The same young people who voted 2-1 for Obama are now a little bit older. They're like 35, 45, right?
Me.
And
I voted for Obama.
yeah, and they're voting for Trump,
That
or they're
that's
coming
me.
close to a majority group for Trump. They voted for, I mean, so this idea that, okay, young people don't get conservative as you get older, but also the other day in the post-election survey you had by YouGov, you had Trump with a plus 19 rating among 18 to 29-year-olds.
It's crazy.
Right. So people are, it really is, it really does seem like it's one of those moments where both people can shift over the course of their lives, but there is kind of this imprinting that happens, with the first few elections you vote in. And this is the first time I can remember that Republicans have had a chance with somebody to create that imprint. And that's when you talk about Gen X currently being a little bit more of a Republican leaning group today. You can give a lot of credit to these are the people who grew up during the Reagan years, and that's what they
Mm.
remember. And there's now going to be a generation of people, like just like there was a generation of people who grew up under Obama. There's now going to be a generation of people who grew up under Trump, and frankly, don't all the stuff that happened in his first term or his campaign the first time they don't really remember. very much of that moment. But
Right.
yeah, I mean, I think that the idea that there was this sort of pop culture, right, and particularly maybe a young male culture that sprung up this time or has been springing up in the bar stools of the world. And I think really Trump seized on that in a way, he hadn't before, which is really smart. But I think in some sense, that was already happening, right? I mean, I think that these groups were moving towards him anyway. And even before the Elon Musk thing, I mean, a year ago, you were seeing polls showing Trump was potentially on the verge of winning young voters, on the verge of winning Hispanics, on the verge of doing, really well among African American voters. And it was just the opportunity, right? The opportunity that presented itself based on the fact that people were so unhappy with the Democrats who had just broken all their promises that they had made to these young people.
Getting in shape can be so hard. Most of us have struggled with it. That's why the Caliber app has been life changing for me. Caliber is a strength training and nutrition coaching program that's completely personalized to you. Through their app, you get paired with a personal trainer on a fitness program and nutrition plan completely customized to your goals. Whether it's muscle building, weight loss, ditching the dad bod, or mom bod, your trainer is there to help you achieve your goals and get the body you want and deserve and get on board before the new year. Don't wait until the new year. I know the holidays are coming and everybody gets the effort, but now is the time to double down, not give up. We've arranged a special deal for our Walk-Ins Welcome audience where you get $100 off for the first 3 months. Go to caliberstrong.com/walk-ins. This is a great deal, and you get a 30-day money-back guarantee if you're not happy with the program. So just click the link below to get signed up. That's caliberstrong.com/walk-ins. I'll tell you what these young kids do remember is all of their teachers crying during the Trump years. I used to hear the
Yeah.
craziest stories from my family members of their kids coming home and telling stories about their teachers during the first Trump administration, and they would have to be like, "Your teacher is insane." Like, and so I think a lot of these kids, they might not remember like all of the media around it, but they definitely experienced a lot of mental instability coming from people in their life around Trump in particular. And I don't know, I mean, I wasn't surprised about Gen Z at all. I know a lot of those kids. I have, nephews around those ages. I've been talking to them for years, and they also grew up under, for lack of a better word, because I don't like to use it, but it encapsulates what they grew up under, was this very strong sense of kind of wokeism that they lived kind of under, and this was their first time to really vote against a lot of that.
I totally agree. And I just think that, like, after I tweeted something like this, but after 2016 and after Trump starts campaign, I think many people who moved over to the Democrats and, didn't vote for Trump did so because, maybe they thought this guy isn't really stable, right? This doesn't seem like a very prudent thing to do, and they maybe thought it looked for a while like the Democrats were the party
Right.
of stability, were the party of normal, were the party of people who are just basically responsible citizens. But when you look at what's happening in these very blue suburbs and you look at what's happening in these very blue cities, it is anything but stability. It is anything but um, people who feel things don't feel stable at all. And that's a theme I feel like I keep returning to. But even just the mental health crisis and all of these things, that the self-reported levels of mental health among young liberals versus young conservatives, or satisfaction with families, all those metrics being kind of off the charts, and then people being exposed to these things at school, but from authority figures.
Yeah.
Nonetheless, the people who are supposed to be telling you to calm down, to not take these things too seriously, are the ones who are just spinning you up. I mean,
Right.
that is something that, yeah, and I think people just had enough of that.
What's some of the most surprising in looking at all of the data coming out now about the election, what's some of the stuff that surprises you the most?
Well, I mean, maybe maybe I wasn't, maybe it's hard to be surprised since I predicted everything, right?
Yeah. I mean, you were
But
right about literally everything. So what's that like?
I can't, but I will honestly say a lot of that is I just don't feel like it was pretty clear to me what was like some version of this was going to happen. Whether it happened in 24 or 28, but I thought more than likely going to happen in 24. But look, I mean, the fact that you just seen this continued movement, I mean, that was even stronger than I expected in a lot of areas. It was even stronger than I expected along the border and all these things where the conventional wisdom says, well, these things can't keep going that long. It'll eventually come back, or you'll eventually see people coming back. Well, you didn't really see that, and I think the big thing, the big takeaway from that is like, look, you've had for a long period of time, you used the word permission structure before. For a long period of time, you have not had a permission structure to break with the Democratic Party in a lot of these places where you had this sort of sense of group identity or solid. It wasn't even this, when I say group identity, it's not in the sense of this woke identity politics. It's in the sense of all of my friends are voting this way.
Right.
All my friends and family are voting this way. And they expect me to vote this way. And so the more that I'm in those places and exposed to that, the more I'm probably going to vote this way, even if I don't believe a lot of the things, right, that I'm voting for. And I think it just started to break down, right? It started to break down with just people looking around and seeing, gosh, there's more Trump flags, more Trump signs, more people who are vocally, willing to come out and break with those traditions. You see it in people just kind of moving out to the suburbs, moving out to kind of more integrated communities, intermarrying more from a racial perspective. That has shifted things too. So I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, that's just going to continue, right? I think, but I think we are headed towards what I hope is a more healthy multiracial democracy, right, where your race does not determine who you're going to vote for. That as a result of that, you don't have political parties thinking they can pit different groups against each other
Mhm.
on the basis of race. That you basically have, what you basically have is normal people just sort of deciding who to vote for based on their personal values and what their personal beliefs are.
I loved that in your book, in the introduction in particular, where it was so optimistic, where you were talking about how it's actually, like you're saying, evidence that we're moving into a less racial society, and, um, I feel like, I was saying this on Brendan's podcast, like, it feels like we're in the Republicans and conservatives got a little bit of, and maybe this is Elon's influence and some of the other people who have come on board, this, like, founder energy, where there's this
Mhm.
very real sense of optimism and kind of move fast and break things, but, like, let's get in there, and there's better ways to do things with our infrastructure, and I hope that they can actually, it feels optimistic, and I think people, after, a lot of feelings of hopelessness and the depression and stuff that came with the pandemic, it feels like there's some optimism, and people are not like this fake kind of joy that was trying to be,
Yeah.
people can see through that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, it was this, I hope that it's kind of a roaring 20s feeling,
Mm.
right? And I
Mhm.
think that that's great. And the thing that I always, the thing that is just interesting to me, I will say, is when you had, and particularly after the first Trump administration, people saying, well, we just want, people who can run the country who are competent, right? And what they mean, when people say that, right, is, oh, people who believe truth over lies, and kind of all of these totems that you heard from the Democrats. But the real myth, I mean, that myth was just shattered,
Right.
I think, beyond all recognition, that they can pass these big spending bills, and they built 7 electric car chargers, right? They
Right.
pass these infrastructure bills. They don't build infrastructure because there's so many rules and
Right.
committees and processes and procedures that they have built up in these big cities to stop these things from happening. Even, now it's the environmental laws that tell you you can't build clean energy, like all that type of stuff, all those contradictions. And you saw it in the blue states, right? The blue states moved pretty dramatically towards Trump because nothing was working
Mhm.
in these blue states and these blue cities.
Yeah.
I
I
think
wonder.
ultimately performance matters.
Yeah, I mean, I've been saying reality remains undefeated. Eventually, you're gonna be confronted by it, and I was thinking when you were talking about the, permissive structure, um, I wonder how much of that, and it was just a thought that occurred to me, how much of it broke down during COVID when people were isolated and apart from their families and friends and those structures they were normally around socially, holidays, etc, and they were having very real divides over things like the vaccine. And because you saw, this was something interesting I was listening to on a podcast, somebody talking about, have they lost any friends over their Trump vote? And they said, oh no, I shot all those people in either 2016 if they voted for them then, or in another wave in 2020 around a lot of the COVID stuff, because within families there was so much tension about masking and unmasking, and it was not always cohesive and caused a lot of interfamilial kind of fighting and breaking down even in social groups. So I wonder how much of that also liberated people to vote for Trump this time around.
I think it's a really, really interesting theory, and I do think that there's so much of the pandemic accelerated these things. I still think, though, the fact that you had 2020, it was horrible, and then 2021 didn't feel all that different. I think that was
Mhm.
the rude awakening for a lot of people,
Mm.
right? That it should have felt different. We should, once the vaccine was what had arrived, and by the way, I thought that Trump should have made a bigger deal during that election about that he was the one who brought you the vaccine. Right. Well, once that was there, we could go back to normal, and we didn't really for a while.
Not at all. And then I became not an anti-vaxxer at all, an anti-vax mandator, and it because I was in California, I would see parents with, like, no masks while their kids played in I was like, "What is even happening in this state?" It is so crazy to me. And, yeah, that was, and then I was doing road trips during that time, and it was wild to drive from California to through Arizona, where you'd be at a bar and everyone would be unmasked, to Texas, where everyone's pretty much normal, and I'd go back and be like, people aren't living like this, right? Like, you don't have to live this way. It was pretty crazy. I don't think I was ever quite as aware of the impact of federalism and two Americas as I was during that time.
Well, I also, and another way it manifested is a lot of people moved. They moved to places like
Me being
Florida,
one of them, I moved to
and where
Texas.
and where have you moved to? You moved to Texas, right?
Yep.
And people really, this sort of sorting based on values and that type of thing was really not a thing prior to 2020, and has since become like a real big thing. And Texas became a lot redder this time. Florida, obviously, we knew was going to get a lot redder, but I think this one of the stories of this election was Texas getting, I think it's like 14 points, and so this idea that, oh, we just need to move all these people down to Texas, and we need to have Hispanics become the majority of the population in Texas. Like, none of those things are going to work out for them. And that'll be
Mm,
a blue state. And you had people saying before the election, oh, Texas is on its way to being a blue state. Maybe not this time, but it's just going to creep. Those suburbs are just going to get bluer and bluer and bluer. And it just didn't happen. And the kicker in this in 2030, Texas, Florida, they're just going to gain more and more congressional seats.
mm,
So, such that, the Democrats could win Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and it still wouldn't matter.
right. Interesting. What is your advice for the Democrats?
Well, look, I mean, look. If I give advice to the Democrats, they're just going to automatically say you're trolling. I mean, this is what I get on Twitter, right? Oh, they'll go do the opposite. So, yeah, you should drop all the woke stuff. You should nominate somebody authentic, which is my actual advice. But people will assume that yeah, I actually mean the opposite, and they'll probably do the opposite, right? So that's just a funny aside. No,
Yeah.
seriously, no, I do think you have to solve for both the obviously there's somewhat of a policy problem. They do have this perception that they're always like looking to basically, if we're too woke, we're just not going to talk about that, right? That issue, rather than saying, no, and this is why I disagree with this.
Mhm.
Like, you have to draw a clear contrast, or else people don't know what you're talking about or where you stand relative to. So if there is this thing, if you think it's a problem, even if you think it's unfairly a problem, you have to do something to clarify actively for people that this is where you stand, right? And that's what, frankly, Donald Trump did with the rest of the Republican Party, throwing everyone in the Republican Party under the bus. And as a result, you had Republicans, rank and file Republicans, saying, I want to be with this person because this is somebody who I implicitly trust, who will stand up to the establishment, who's
Yeah.
different than the old Republican Party. But I also just think like a person, somebody with a personality, right,
Yeah.
would also go a long way. Somebody who seems authentic, seems real, who actually does this pivot, I think would actually go a lot further than okay, you have I don't know if Gretchen Whitmer, not that she's going to do it, or just somebody who just seems like an interchangeable cog in the machine, saying something but you can't really trust that
Who do
it's
you
going to
think
go
it'll
on with
be in 2028?
real. Well, our polling has a front runner, and it's Kamala Harris. I don't know. I mean,
I think I
I
saw
what
that.
that's going to be. I don't. I can imagine that would be it. But look, I think it's going to be a long process for them. I think it's going to be. It should be an unusually kind of open process because they tried to kind of short circuit this debate by just slipping her in, and it didn't
Yeah.
work. So now they need, probably are going to need to go through a pretty long process to figure this out.
What is your I know you have to go, so I'm gonna ask my 2 questions I ask at the end. I could talk to you forever. What is your biggest defect of character?
My biggest defect of character is, oh my gosh, I mean, I shouldn't have a ready answer to this, but I feel like I do. And I don't know. I mean, I just feel like, okay, I probably get really, really in the weeds on things some of this time. And I know this sounds like the answer you give. I'm like, I work too hard, but sometimes it's like, okay, there are things I really should be doing, but no, I'm going to look at this map. We're going to make this map. We're going to, just look at these statistics. And, I still do fall prone to some procrastination. And it's usually, but yeah, sometimes I do write books about the what I do that are the result of that. So I can claim that it's actually not a defective character, that I'm actually doing work.
You're just talking about wasting your time on X. Do you
Yeah,
actually
that's
all of
right.
us.
That's right. That's it.
Do you, do you have another book coming out?
Not as of yet, not as of yet, but we will, kind of. I think there are a lot of people. I have heard from a lot of folks who probably want to see a new addition to this one, or to see more work. to based on the 2024 election results. So stay tuned.
And what's your biggest asset?
My biggest asset. Well, I just I just feel like maybe I'm not as certain about this one, but than I am about the character defect. But I do feel like I have I really kind of try to stick to my guns on predictions when I believe I'm right. Obviously,
Mm.
I'm going to BS you when I am just genuinely not sure. But I feel maybe in this time around, I thought, well, I'm on something, and I'm just kind of going to stick to it.
And did
And
you think all the polls were kind of BS? Because most of them had it as, like, very close.
well, look, I mean, directionally, right, it was pretty close, but I think based on some of the things that we were seeing in our polling, there are people saying their neighbors are voting a certain
Right.
way. That there was always probably a chance that I was thinking just being polls are just one ingredient in a broader analytical mix. So I
Yeah.
don't think you just want to be relying on polls and people who try to construct this sort of narrative reality based exclusively on the polls are just going to be missing a whole lot.
Yeah. They feel sometimes like just a way to kind of manipulate people's perception too. Even if they're trying to get some accuracy, sometimes it feels that way they're being used in media.
It's definitely possible. I mean, I don't want to. I don't want to accuse anyone of anything, and I don't generally think that people are trying to skew things a certain way.
I
But
wouldn't say the pollsters, I would say the media will use them to
oh yeah,
manipulate.
absolutely, and no, 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 absolutely, and they've had polls results on both sides of this. But remember, when Trump was ahead, it was all oh well, this isn't actually going to happen on election day. People are just venting at Biden, right? And
Mm,
that's not actually going to happen. Or if oh my God, Hillary is ahead by 2 points in 2016, she's a shoo,
right.
right? Or 3 points or whatever, and they're like, no, she's not, right? Based on the state polls, no, she's not. But I do think that people are still pretty bad at interpreting this stuff, and the media especially.
Do you, has your book been selling more since the election? Did you see, like, a upsurge in it?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's been good. I mean, it's still early, it's still pretty incomplete numbers, but definitely an uptick since the election.
Good. I'm glad to hear that. It's really good. It's very, it's just, like, interesting how your own curiosity about something that you felt like you were wrong about, kind of because that's in your intro, you talk about how which I also thought was fascinating was this question that was bothering you is what led to following the numbers and looking at all of the data on this and actually coming to a conclusion just because you realized, you were missing something.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think, and that moment really happened for me after 2016, right? Where I was like,
Mm,
I was pretty sure he was going to lose. I wasn't 100% on it, but I was pretty sure. But clearly, I mean, I always think that the election always surprises us in one direction or the other, right? There's always something we're missing, and even if there's like kind of something that seems like there's a bare hint of something that's going to happen, and boy, does it happen.
right.
And I think that was probably, I should have followed some of those signs. And
Mm,
I'll tell you, even though I didn't necessarily have a poll that said, "Oh, Trump is actually going to win," what I did have was the polling data showing that most people were seemingly on his side
interesting.
about a lot of these types of cultural questions and the sense that America was a country in decline and that we needed to do something kind of radical to fix it. And
Wow.
that was, kind of what I saw in 2016. But it wasn't, again, going back to that whole, like, why do we ask the question about what do you want to see in a president, right? Because that's going to probably tell you more about how the undecideds are going to break in the end, right? Than, just asking them, because they're not going
Right.
to who they're going to vote for.
Right. Interesting. Wow, what a fascinating job you have. And I mean, I could get so in the weeds on this and I don't really understand any of it, but I'm so fascinated by it because I'm just all vibes. I feel like I'm a weather vane for the vibe shifts in America. So it's nice, 2022, I was so wrong about the red wave, and there was this kind of very famous clip when I was on Rogan of him being like, "It's gonna be a red wave like The Shining," and we were both seeing it, and, when you're a comedian, you have, like, you see it in your audiences. You have that immediate reaction from people with jokes, and you can kind of take a temperature, especially if you're going all over the country. And him saying like they're making Republicans, and I saw it too in my life, and so we were both like, all right, I guess we were wrong about that, but it was happening. It just was not until this election that you really started to see that what we were kind of perceiving on the ground. So, and what you saw in your book. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
Where can we find you and your book?
Yeah, so my book is everywhere fine books are sold on Amazon and elsewhere, but it's called Party of the People Inside the Multiracial Populist Coalition Remaking the GOP. Subtitle's kind of a mouthful. And I'm Patrick Ruffini in most places, so my name, and that is on X primarily. But also I have a Substack at patrickruffini.com.
Your ex is one of my favorites, for the record.
Thank you.
I'm always creeping it. Have a good day.
All right. Thanks so much.
The check-in with Bridget and Cousin Maggie can now be found at Phetasy.com. It's been titled Another Round with Bridget Phetasy, and it's now in video.
This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.